In fact, you know what? There's a whole host of other cars on the market that are asking tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars more than these. And I tell you what, they're not going to show the same sort of resilience with their exteriors like these have after 30 years.
Back in the day, workshops were full of these. Not so much now, but not for the reason you might think.
There's an old saying, right? Driving a slow car fast is so much more fun than driving a fast car slowly. This thing nails that saying. Okay, surely an Excel must be one of the worst used cars you could ever buy, right? Brand new, they were one of the cheapest cars available, made at a time when Hyundai were probably still trying to figure out how to make cars in the first place. And now that they're pushing 30 years old, even though they're incredibly cheap, buying one would have to be insane. But is it? Because the humble little Excel has quite the dedicated fan base. And because there's not much to the car in the first place, does that mean there's not much to go wrong? Well, that's what we are here to find out. We're going to answer all of those questions and so many more, starting with what can go wrong with these. Let's kick off with the exterior, and it's the paint. See, after 30 years in the hot Aussie climate, faded clear coat like this and up there is to be expected. Now, this fade generally starts on the roof and the bonnet, but according to the owners, as long as they're garaged, maybe polished once a year and just looked after in general, this paint, it can be kind of resilient. However, something that won't last are the door handles. These are going to break. Even in this car, the interior door handle, yeah, no more. In fact, plenty of owners recommend just carrying spare door handles with you should the worst happen. But the good news with that is that these door handles are really cheap and they're easy to buy. Now the glass, it can misalign and this can eventually cause issues with the mechanism. This can be made worse if the manual window winders also fail, which, yeah, they can. Interestingly, the power windows seem to avoid this. But to fix this problem in general, just give it a coat of some silicone spray and it should keep moving okay. Now next up, something that might surprise you, rust doesn't seem to be a major concern with these, although they're not perfect. On the 3 and 5 door hatchback models, around the opening boot aperture and especially around the base of the gas struts, corrosion can build up here. But if you just keep this clear and clean, you shouldn't have too much of an issue. But look, no matter if it's one of the hatchback models or a sedan, just go over the entire exterior and look for signs of rust. If there is, it might be a sign that the car's had an accident and the repairs have been done on the cheap. Even little things, like if the car's been over a speed hump too harshly and it sort of scratched the underneath of the car, corrosion can form under there as well. Check the whole car. Now, you might come across a handful of other sporadic issues like the washer jets not working properly, or maybe the door rubbers have seen better days. But overall, with the exteriors of these, they seem to be pretty trouble-free. In fact, you know what? There's a whole host of other cars on the market that are asking tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars more than these. And I tell you what, they're not going to show the same sort of resilience with their exteriors like these have after 30 years. Also, there are various one-make racing series featuring these happening all around the world. But with how aggressive and competitive some of these racing series can be, it can result in certain spare parts asking a premium. Things like headlights and tail lights, they maybe ask a little bit more than you're expecting. In saying that, it is a 30-year-old Hyundai, so it's still not going to be too expensive. Also, these racing series have shown that the brackets that hold the front and rear bars on can be a bit on the flimsy side, and the edges of the front and rear bars can drop down a little bit, but this is easily fixed with some screws or cable ties. We should also mention, if you do have racing or track aspirations for the Excel that you might be buying, you might want to focus on finding a post-update or post-1998 model, because as well as the usual visual and equipment enhancements, the single cam 1.5 litre was swapped out for a twin cam unit. And this new twin cam engine boosted power and torque levels to near underwhelming levels. That's obviously being way too harsh because, as we're going to soon show you, these can be hilariously fun to drive. But aside from the engine and various iteration choices you're going to make, there are also 8 different trim levels to choose from. However, just be aware that some of the base ones, they do put a capital B in bare basics. We're talking no power steering, steel wheels, possibly no air conditioning, purely a radio, and that means no CD or even cassette player. And if you're a younger member of our viewing audience, just ask your parents what a CD or a cassette even is. But look, obviously the later and higher spec models can feature more equipment, but we'll get into all of that when we get inside in a second. But what's a used Excel asking these days? Well, at the very bottom end of the market, and we're talking cars that are registered and actually work, around about $500. At the other end of the spectrum, the most you're going to pay is about $12,000. Now, if you're looking at the race prepped Excels, these currently range from about $10,000 to $20,000. But that means these have got to be one of the most affordable ways to get into competitive motorsport. And with how competitive these series are, it might be one of the most enjoyable and challenging series you could ever take part in. In fact, there's a host of our top class racing drivers out there that punted these things around circuits and bloody loved every second of it. But if you have no aspirations for competing in motorsports, but you just want one of these as a bit of a track day special, trust me, hammering a cheap car around a race circuit is so much more fun than driving something that's potentially tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars more. Plus, everything on this is pretty cheap. In fact, you can buy the whole car for less than the cost of an Audi RS6 headlight. And because they weigh less than 1,000 kilos, they're light on the consumables, things like tyres and brakes. They don't chew through them like a rate at knots. However, just be careful of some of the cheap aftermarket parts out there. Wiper blades, for example. Some of the cheap wiper blades are just absolutely terrible. They don't last. But then on the flip side, some of the OEM ones just ask way too much money, but still do a crap job at wiping. Look, instead, just do what we do and get yourself a set of Wipertech wiper blades. They're so easy to order online. They're a breeze to fit, and they are honestly some of the best wiping blades out there. Plus, when you get a set via the link below, you're going to get 15% off and free express shipping. Although, don't go doing any of that if you're planning on doing what Riley has done and lend us your car to feature, because if you do that, we're going to give you a set of Wipertech blades as a thank you present. And to volunteer your car, just email me via the link below or message us on the socials. Also, just another thing on Riley, we met him through the owners groups and forums when doing the research for these things. And I've got to say, as I alluded to at the start, this community are so supportive and they're so full of absolutely brilliant advice. It's kind of no surprise that a car that lacks any kind of pretense attracts just really good people. Now, just on the topic of pretense, let's talk image here. And look, go with me, all right? This will make sense. I think the right example of Excel could be a future classic. Not in the same way as like a Subaru WRX 22B, not that kind of classic, but it's really important to remember the Excel of this generation marked such a turning point for the Australian automotive industry. In 1998, the Excel was Australia's highest selling car. And look, fair enough, it offered the sort of solid, no frills, yet brilliant value for money car that those on a tight budget needed at the time. And it didn't only cement this category of car in the Australian market, Hyundai's drive away, no more to pay marketing strategy revolutionized car pricing in this country. Also, look, I know these aren't regarded as being, say, beautiful in the traditional sense, but in the same way a V20 Camry or a VB Holden Commodore are now seen as classics, and remember, they weren't exactly the best looking cars of their time either, but yet now they're kind of ironically cool. I think the same's going to happen for the Excel. Seriously, I know you think I'm crazy, but I think I'm right. Now, inside, in terms of design at least, is pretty much like the outside. It exists. This is a car's interior. This is certainly not winning any awards for design and aesthetics in here. And as you'd expect in a car of this budget and this age, everything in here, maybe aside from the seats, is made from hard plastics or vinyl. The problem with that is after 30 years in the harsh Australian climate, a lot of these plastics and vinyl components can wear. What I mean is that the interior trim, especially the dashboard, cracking is a thing. It is probably just going to happen. Worst case scenario, it can just completely disintegrate. Even in this one, which is in really, really good condition, you can see it's starting to crack, hence the dash mat, which just kind of covers up the issue. Next up, the carpets. They're about as synthetic as it gets, and removing stains or even just cleaning them might require a forensic cleaner more than just a normal auto detailer. And also with so many hard plastics, look, a child care centre worth of rattles should be expected in here. But if the interiors have been well maintained and the car has been garaged for most of its life, plenty of owners have reported really excellent levels of resilience. Even in this car, this thing's had a tough life, but overall, it's not too bad in terms of wear and tear. Actually, there are cars out there that have got north of 300,000 kilometers on them and the interiors are in really good shape. That's one of the advantages of just making everything out of plastic. But look, again, like the exterior, very little actually goes wrong with these interiors. Maybe because there's not much to go wrong. But this is interesting because when these cars were brand new, they were criticised for at best being basic, at worst being cheap and nasty, but they seem to have stood the test of time pretty bloody well. Plus, as we've seen in so many of our other videos, the chances of current cars lasting 30 years and aging this well are honestly slim to none. Actually, current manufacturers could take a leaf out of the Excel spreadsheet. See what I did there? Yeah. Now, in terms of living with this interior, ergonomics first. interesting. It kind of feels like the seat is convex rather than concave, so my bum kind of wants to roll around on either side of it. There's basically no adjustment to the steering wheel either, and with my height, I wish it did go a little bit higher, but I'm just being a dickhead because, like, come on, it's an Excel. Of course, there's not going to be a lot of adjustment to it, but overall ergonomics, it's okay. I'm sitting in a car. Oh, also, just on the seats, don't be surprised if the seat bolsters on the entry side of both seats have had the saw. Their squidge is going to be way too squidgy by now. Also, as expected, all the switchgear feels very, very cheap. That's to be expected. Then as far as practicality goes, it's okay. There are door bins, but they're really only big enough to keep your spare window winder there. There's another little section here for your other spare window winder. This is going to be a thing. Brittle plastics, these just sort of fall apart. You've got a spot for coins just here. Nothing under the gear stick except to collect dust. Has got an okay sized glove box. Nowhere for sunglasses. That's about it for practicality. Yeah, honestly, not great. However, another complaint, and this is especially if you can find one of the incredibly rare examples out there that is still fitted with the factory infotainment system. Infotainment is being bloody optimistic. It's just the lack of tech and features in these things. For example, even in some of the higher spec final production cars, a CD player was actually an optional extra. Obviously you can forget anything in terms of modern phone connectivity or Bluetooth. Even the speakers are pretty crap, and there's hardly any sound deadening in here either. Actually, I'm not even sure if sound deadening was even invented when these were made. But the good news with all of this is that all of this stuff can be upgraded. In fact, try to think of an Excel as almost like a blank canvas for you to create your dream infotainment setup. We're talking adding things like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto through a huge screen, or like a live concert level of speakers, maybe Rolls-Royce levels of sound deadening. You can fit a reversing camera, maybe parking sensors front and back. And why not combine this with some sexy aftermarket wheels, some performance suspension, maybe a short shift kit for the gearbox, we'll get to that in a second, maybe a performance exhaust system, and so much more. And if all this sounds really appealing, you've got to check out our mates at Automotive Superstore via the link down there. They carry over 400,000 products from over 500 manufacturers. Everything comes with a fitment guarantee. And to work out what stuff's going to fit your car best, all you've got to do is type in your rego and the website will filter down to the right parts for you. Check them out, the link's down there. Now, aside from the infotainment stuff, do your homework on which Excel you're looking at buying, because each example can vary depending on what options were ticked in the model and the trim spec and all that sort of stuff. For example, some cars won't even have power operated mirrors or power windows or air conditioning. Weirdly, this car, the original owner opted for a sunroof, but then no air conditioning and no power windows, no power really anything. Weird. And then we have the levels of safety, which honestly, it makes base jumping look like the safer option. Even in this car, no airbags whatsoever. In fact, if you want a bit of a scare, go and watch the Euro NCAP crash testing of these models, because it doesn't exactly fill you with confidence. Although, the race car versions of these, with the full cage and single piece racing seat and harnesses, they're pretty bloody safe. Now the back seat, I'm exactly 17 centimeters taller than 2024 V8 Supercar champion and former Hyundai Excel racing driver Will Brown. This is in my driving position, and interesting, I am crammed in here, like my knees have to do the OnlyFans style leg spread because there's no room for them, my feet are getting crushed. However, the seat itself, even though you kind of sink down into it, really comfy. It actually feels quite supportive. Obviously getting in and out of the 3-door is way harder than the 5-door. They're a breeze to get in and out of, but even then, in the sedan, not a lot of room in the back seat. Then as far as features and practicality in the second row, nah. And then as far as practicality in the boot goes, actually pretty bloody good. And the opening aperture on the hatch models is excellent. You can fold the seats down. Now, I was going to see if the seat could do the whole flippy floppy thing to fold flat, but my tetanus shots aren't up to date, so I don't want to go sticking my hand in crevices that I don't know what's at the bottom of them. Now, we need your assistance with something. We've noticed that about 75% of the viewers of ReDriven haven't subscribed to the channel, but we would love to reduce that number, because the more of you that subscribe, the more content we can make for you. Also, if you'd like a few extra perks, why not consider joining our ReDriven membership program? The link for that is down below. Actually, it's right near the link for the cheat sheet for this car. It is a must read if you're in the market for one of these, because we've listed out all the common issues and a few other facts and figures. Check it out. Must read if you're buying one. So in the same way that the levels of features and equipment can vary depending on which Excel you're looking at, the same can be said for the driving experience, but we'll get into all that in a second. First of all, what are the complaints and issues that you need to be aware of? First of all, The gear shift travel is so long, it could give you tennis elbow, but the good news here, you can replace the bushers or fit a short shift kit and that fixes up the issue. Next up, by this age and probably loads of kilometers, chances are the suspension bushers have left the chat. So just when you're driving the car, feel and listen for any like clunking or weird sounds, or if the car just feels wobbly. But again, all that's easily fixed. Also, feel that the acceleration and braking is smooth and linear. Obviously, this is a budget car, but even so, it shouldn't have any peaks and troughs in the way it accelerates or brakes. And as we alluded to before, another big complaint, just expect so many rattles and weird sounds. These cars are loud and not in kind of a fun way. But look, enough complaints. What are these things like to drive? Well, look, I've driven a number of Excels over the years, and I've got to say, no two of them ever drove the same. One of them was so enthusiastic to understeer, even at like walking pace. There had to be something dramatically wrong with the suspension, but apparently there wasn't. And then another one would lift off oversteer so aggressively, it felt like it was set up for a drifting competition. And then there was another one that, let's say, may or may not have been a hire car that I may have hypothetically taken deep off-road to see what four-wheel drive abilities it had when it wasn't a four-wheel drive, and let's just say hypothetically it may have pulled shapes off-road that you wouldn't believe it could actually achieve. Honestly, that thing, it went up trails that even proper four-wheel drives would be a bit apprehensive about, if I'd done that in the first place at all. Who knows? And then there's this one, which honestly is so much fun to drive. I wasn't expecting this. Okay, lack of power steering, that's a pain in the neck when you're parking, but then because the pillars are all so small, it's so easy to see out of, so parking it is an absolute breeze. Yes, there are the rattles and whatnot, but as loads of owners, and even those that race these mentioned, fit some good suspension, some good brakes, and an okay set of tires, and they can be absolutely hilarious. This thing nails it. I'm having so much fun. Although, looking down and not seeing an airbag, that doesn't exactly fill you with confidence. But then, when you do find an opportunity to plant that right foot and have an actual go, the car gives you this kind of weird confidence, because chances are, as long as you have any kind of driving ability, your talent will exceed the car's talent. So the car is never really intimidating, and it feels like you can just kind of play with it and just enjoy it for what it is. There's an old saying, right? Driving a slow car fast is so much more fun than driving a fast car slowly. And with so many modern cars just getting faster and faster, and with so many electronics kind of diluting the experience, this thing nails that saying. Plus, all this means that you can have as much fun as you want while never breaking the speed limit. Surely that's an awesome thing, right? But look, as fun as this thing is to drive and as robust as the exterior and interior seem to be, what about mechanically? Surely this is where this thing's going to fall to pieces, right? Unfortunately, I can't elaborate on that because I'm not a qualified mechanic. Luckily, Jim is.
Look, at this point, it's pretty much just age-related issues you need to look out for. Cooling system hoses and steel pipes with O-rings, they're all going to need checking. In fact, anything made of rubber, fuel lines and brake lines, they're all going to need to be looked at. The timing belt on these is due at 90,000 kilometres or 6 years, so that is definitely something you're going to have to check. It's worth mentioning as well, these engines are an interference engine, and what that means, if the timing belt should break, that means the pistons and the valves do collide, and when that happens, that makes a terrible and expensive mess. And obviously, if you are doing that timing belt, you should do the water pump while you're in there. Now, back in the day, blown head gaskets were pretty common on these, although we don't see too many now, but yeah, back then, a lot of head gaskets. The distributors on the single cams, they were a little bit problematic, and the coils on the twin cams, they were a bit of an issue as well. We used to see a lot of inlet manifold gaskets split on these, and they used to just have a vacuum leak, and that would just make the engine run terribly. And the auto speed control valve as well used to be a little bit problematic too. Chances are, if it exists now, it is a survivor, and that means someone at some point must have really looked after it. Interesting fact, in Australia we have a Hyundai Excel race series. Now that actually has pushed the price of these up a little bit and made a good one a bit hard to find. Now after that race series is finished in the future, and there won't be many of these left, so a good road-going version possibly could be worth something.
Now before we let you know if we think you should buy a used Excel or not, we find it interesting that in the comments, anytime we feature a Hyundai product, there are always people going, Hyundai is shit, terrible car, why would you buy one? We've got a funny feeling that the last Hyundai they drove was one of these, and you can criticize it, but then here we are 30 years later, and these things are just a tough little nugget. But should you buy a used Excel? Well, that really kind of depends on which of the two camps the Excel you're looking at falls into, because let's be honest, there are kind of two categories here. They're either clapped out shit boxes selling for next to nothing, or they're well maintained and therefore reliable, resilient and dependable little weapons. And look, unless you're looking at building a project car or turning it into a race or a rally car, don't buy one of the shit boxes. Yeah, we understand they're probably under $1,500, but even at that price, they're not worth the hassle. And also, we'd be avoiding any that spent any of its previous life as a hire car, because people like me drove those and we maybe asked way too much of the engineering. But as for the good examples out there, look, if it passes a pre-purchase inspection and you're happy to care for it in the way that a 30-year-old car requires, and you're not too concerned with the lack of safety measures, yeah, 100% buy one. Obviously, Excels fitting this description are going to ask a little bit more on the used market, but trust us, they are totally worth it. And the same can be said for these. But do you own an Excel? Have you owned an Excel? If so, can you let us know what your ownership experience has been like in the comments below? That way, anyone researching these has more information to draw from.
So you're definitely on it. Why can't I speak?
Now, in terms of living with this interior, okay.